I was 17 when I started working as a junior lifeguard at Lakeside Community Pool for the summer. The pay was decent, the hours were flexible, and I figured sitting in a chair watching people swim would be easy money. Lakeside was the biggest pool in our county, Olympic-sized with a diving section, kiddie area, and a snack bar that sold overpriced slushies. We had 6 lifeguard stations positioned around the perimeter, all supposedly manned during operating hours. Most days, the place was packed with families trying to escape the brutal Oklahoma heat. July 17th was like any other summer day. The thermometer hit 97 degrees before noon. I was stationed at the shallow end, which was typically the easiest spot since it was mostly younger kids with parents hovering nearby. The senior guards preferred the deep end or diving board stations where they could flex for the teenagers. I noticed early on that most of the other guards were more interested in their phones than watching the water. Management had a no-phone policy, but everyone ignored it, hiding their devices inside their rescue tubes or under their chairs. I kept mine in my backpack, partially because I took the job seriously, and partially because my parents would kill me if they knew I wasn't paying attention. The pool was particularly crowded that day. A summer camp had brought in about 40 kids, ranging from 8 to 15. Their counselors were supposed to help monitor them, but they mostly congregated in the shade, chatting among themselves. Around 2:30, I noticed Jason, the head lifeguard, had been texting for almost 20 minutes straight. The diving board guard, Melissa, was scrolling through social media while occasionally glancing up. Even Mark, who was usually attentive, had his attention fixed on something beneath his chair. I did my scheduled scan of my zone, counting heads and checking for proper behavior, then moved to do a courtesy sweep of the adjacent zones since no one else seemed to be watching. That's when I noticed something at the bottom of the semi-deep section, a dark shape that didn't move with the water's natural flow. At first, I thought it was a towel or t-shirt that had fallen in. Then I recognized the distinct outline of a human body. Without hesitation, I blew my whistle and jumped in. The water muffled the sounds above as I dove down. It was a boy, maybe 14, lying motionless at the bottom. His eyes were open, staring vacantly upward, his dark hair waving gently in the water. I grabbed him under the arms and pushed off the bottom, breaking the surface with a gasp. I screamed for help as I pulled him to the edge. Jason finally looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from annoyance to horror. People started screaming and parents grabbed their children, pulling them from the water. It took Mark a full 15 seconds to realize what was happening and activate the emergency action plan. I climbed out and immediately started CPR while Jason called 911. The boy's lips were blue, his skin pale and wrinkled from being underwater too long. As I delivered chest compressions, water seeped from his mouth and nose, but there was no response, no coughing, no gasping for air. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, but it was already too late. They took over, using a defibrillator and advanced techniques, but after 20 minutes, they pronounced him dead at the scene. His name was Elijah. He'd been underwater for approximately 4 minutes before I spotted him. The investigation revealed he'd been at the bottom of the pool for nearly 7 minutes total. 7 minutes in a pool with 6 lifeguards on duty. The security footage showed every single guard looking at their phones at some point during those critical minutes. No one saw him struggling. No one noticed when he slipped beneath the surface. No one was watching except the security cameras. The aftermath was devastating. Elijah's parents sued the city, the pool management company, and each lifeguard individually. The police investigation uncovered that Jason had been exchanging inappropriate texts with a 17-year-old patron. Melissa had been posting pool pictures to her social media during her shift. Mark had been playing an online game. All 6 of us were fired immediately, and 3 faced criminal negligence charges. The pool closed permanently after the incident. I was the only one who wasn't on my phone, but that didn't matter. I was part of a team that failed. I visit the abandoned pool, now drained and graffitied. The place where a boy died while surrounded by people who were paid to prevent exactly that tragedy. Every time I pass a public pool and see lifeguards with phones in hand, I want to scream until my lungs burst. Because I know what they don't. How quickly silence can replace splashing, and how the weight of guilt never stops drowning you. My brother's 30th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone gathering with close friends at his new house in Rosewood Heights. Mark had finally achieved his dream, a modest 3-bedroom with the backyard pool he'd always wanted. He spent weeks preparing for that Saturday in August, cleaning the pool, stringing up lights, and organizing the perfect playlist. The invitations specified casual afternoon pool party transitioning to evening drinks. Nothing extravagant, just 30 or so friends enjoying the last stretch of summer together. I flew in from Colorado specifically for the weekend, arriving Friday night to help with final preparations. The party started at 3 in the afternoon. Mark's house quickly filled with friends from his college days, work colleagues, and neighbors. The atmosphere was perfect. Upbeat music, the smell of grilling burgers, and the occasional splash from people enjoying the pool. I noticed Ryan arrive around 5. He and Mark had been friends since high school, but their relationship had grown strained in recent years. Ryan had developed a reputation for excessive drinking and inappropriate behavior. Mark invited him purely out of loyalty to their history, though he confided to me that morning his hesitation. "Just keep an eye on him," Mark had said. "He usually starts strong before things go sideways." By 7 o'clock, the party was in full swing. As the sun began setting, fewer people were swimming, and the focus shifted to drinking and conversation. Ryan had been hitting the alcohol hard since arrival, mixing drinks with little restraint. I was talking with Mark's colleague Alyssa when I noticed Ryan becoming increasingly loud and grabby with people near the pool. Mark attempted to intervene, offering him water and suggesting he ease up. Ryan responded with a forced laugh, slapping Mark's back too hard to be friendly. "It's your birthday, man. Loosen up." His words were slurring, his movements erratic. I made a mental note to check in with Mark about possibly asking Ryan to leave before things escalated. David arrived later than most guests, around 8. He'd just finished his hospital shift. He was a pediatric nurse and Mark's former roommate. He was still wearing his scrubs under a light jacket, having come directly from work. David was the responsible type, well-liked for his calm demeanor and dry humor. He wasn't planning to swim, but came to support Mark on his birthday. I watched as he greeted people, eventually making his way to Mark for a warm hug. They were catching up near the shallow end of the pool when Ryan stumbled toward them, drink sloshing over the rim of his cup. The next few moments play in slow motion whenever I recall them. Ryan approached David and Mark, throwing his arm around David's shoulders. "The nurse is here! Now it's a real party!" He was practically shouting. David smiled politely, trying to disengage from Ryan's grip. Something about David's rejection seemed to trigger Ryan. "Come on, don't be so serious." Ryan's face contorted with drunken determination. "You need to cool off." Before anyone could react, Ryan shoved David forcefully toward the pool. David, unprepared and off balance, fell awkwardly. Instead of landing in deeper water, he hit the edge of the shallow end, his head making a sickening crack against the concrete lip before he slumped into the water. The splash silenced the party instantly. Mark was the first to react, diving in fully clothed to pull David out. Blood clouded the water around David's head, turning it a pale pink under the pool lights. Someone screamed. Another person yelled to call 911. I rushed to the pool's edge as Mark dragged David's unconscious body to the steps. A woman I didn't know identified herself as an off-duty EMT and began assessing him. David wasn't breathing. She started CPR while I held his bleeding head, trying to stabilize his neck as she'd instructed. His usually animated face was slack, his skin already taking on a grayish pallor that I recognized from my father's death years before. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. David had suffered a severe basilar skull fracture, and massive brain hemorrhage. They intubated him on site before rushing him to the hospital. Ryan stood frozen at the scene, suddenly sober with the realization of what he'd done. Police officers separated everyone, taking statements and contact information. I rode with Mark in my rental car to the hospital, both of us soaked in pool water and David's blood. We sat in the waiting room for hours until a doctor finally approached with the news we already suspected. David never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead at 11:42 p.m. The legal aftermath dragged on for months. Ryan was charged with involuntary manslaughter and eventually sentenced to 7 years. Mark sold the house within weeks. He couldn't bear to look at the pool where his friend died. The community of friends fractured, some blaming Mark for inviting Ryan despite knowing his issues, others defending that no one could have predicted such a tragedy. What haunts me most isn't the sound of David's head hitting concrete or the sight of blood in the water, but the utter preventability of it all. A 32-year-old nurse who saved children's lives daily, gone because someone couldn't handle their alcohol and thought a dangerous prank would be funny. Sometimes when I'm invited to pool parties now, I find myself watching the interactions around the water with an anxiety no one else seems to share, waiting for the moment when celebration turns to catastrophe in the space of a single, thoughtless push. Two summers ago, I took my kids to Paradise Waves, the newly renovated water park that had just reopened after being closed for 3 years. It was the biggest attraction in our county, a 15-acre complex with wave pools, lazy rivers, and those massive slide towers that you could see from the highway. The place had changed ownership after going bankrupt, and the new management had poured millions into updating everything from the food courts to the filtration systems. Living only 20 minutes away, we'd purchased season passes, figuring we'd get our money's worth over the hot Arizona summer. My daughters, aged 9 and 11, had been begging to go since seeing commercials for the grand reopening. The first weekend was reportedly packed, so we waited until the following Tuesday, hoping for smaller crowds. The park wasn't as empty as I'd hoped, but the lines were manageable. We started with the lazy river, my personal favorite. The water seemed unusually clear, almost too blue, like someone had cranked up the saturation in real life. I remember thinking it smelled stronger than most pools, but assumed it was just fresh chemicals in a new system. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. My younger daughter, Maya, complained that her eyes were stinging after just one loop around the river. I told her to keep her face out of the water and figured she'd be fine. We moved on to the wave pool, where I noticed several lifeguards huddled in conversation, one of them reading from a clipboard with a concerned expression. By lunchtime, Maya's eyes were bloodshot, and my older daughter Zoe had developed small red bumps along her arms. I assumed it was heat rash from the sun and made them both drink water and apply more sunscreen. We ate overpriced pizza in the food court, where I overheard a mother at the next table telling her friend that her son's swim trunks had partially faded after just a few hours in the water. Another woman mentioned that her silver bracelet had tarnished almost instantly. These comments registered as odd but didn't set off alarm bells. I was busy wiping pizza sauce from Maya's chin and planning which attractions to hit after lunch. The Vortex, a 6-story complex of intertwined slides, was next on our list. While waiting in line, I noticed a maintenance worker testing the water at the slide exit, frowning at a small electronic device before speaking urgently into a radio. When we reached the top platform, 15 minutes later, a teenage attendant was turning people away from the yellow slide, directing everyone to the blue and red options instead. Technical difficulties, she explained with practiced cheerfulness. The girls chose the red slide, and I followed on the blue one, meeting them at the bottom. The burning sensation that hit my skin upon splashdown was immediate, not quite painful, but intensely uncomfortable, like being scrubbed with steel wool. The water tasted metallic when it splashed into my mouth. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Zoe's rash had spread to her torso and face, angry red welts that she couldn't stop scratching. Maya was crying, claiming her skin felt on fire. I noticed similar symptoms on other guests: children with inflamed skin, adults with reddened eyes. At the family changing area, I saw a woman with what looked like chemical burns along her shoulders. The inside of my own thighs felt raw, and removing my swimsuit revealed a pattern of irritation everywhere the fabric had been. I approached a staff member who looked barely out of high school, asking if there was a problem with the water. He avoided eye contact, mumbling something about pH balancing issues before suggesting we visit the first aid station if we were uncomfortable. The first aid station was overwhelmed. At least 30 people with symptoms ranging from mild irritation to severe blistering. The single park medic was overwhelmed, telling newcomers there would be a wait. A mother beside me showed me her phone. She'd been texting with her husband, who worked at the municipal water treatment plant. According to him, the new owners had been cited twice during construction for improper chemical storage, but the violations had been resolved, supposedly. While waiting, I used my own phone to search for news about the park's reopening. Buried beneath glowing reviews was a local Reddit thread where former employees claimed corners had been cut on the water treatment system installation to meet the Memorial Day opening deadline. The park announced full closure via loudspeaker at 4:30 p.m., citing unexpected maintenance requirements. No mention of the chemical imbalance, no acknowledgement of the dozens of injured guests. Staff handed out vouchers for return visits as people exited. In the parking lot, I saw ambulances arriving and at least one child being loaded on a gurney, an oxygen mask covering his small face. That night, both my girls developed fevers. Their skin, especially where their swimsuits had been, developed painful blisters that looked like second-degree burns. The emergency room was chaotic, filled with families from the park. Blood tests revealed elevated levels of chlorine compounds and something called chloramines in our systems. The attending physician explained that the water had likely contained dangerous levels of chemicals, possibly from improper mixing of cleaning agents or inadequate filtering of contaminants. The truth emerged in fragments over the following weeks. The park's new filtration system had malfunctioned, but managers delayed closing while attempting repairs. Water testing had shown dangerous pH and chlorine levels as early as 9 a.m., but no action was taken. A whistleblower revealed that the maintenance team had attempted to correct the imbalance by adding more chemicals, accidentally creating a caustic solution that caused chemical burns. In total, 211 people sought medical treatment, with 26 requiring hospitalization for respiratory distress or severe chemical burns. Maya developed scarring across her back that 3 dermatologist appointments haven't improved. Zoe had nightmares for months about her skin melting off. The class action lawsuit is still ongoing, the park permanently closed. I keep the season passes in my desk drawer as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't drowning or accidents, but the invisible poisons lurking in what appears perfectly clear.